managing chain series of webinars. Hope you're all safe and sound in your homes while we continue to bring the world's leading experts to you. Today we have with us Mr. Giorgio Ferraris. Welcome, Giorgio. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
It's my honor, privilege. Thank you for having me.
Please spare your time. So how are things there? Has anything settled down yet?
Working on it. Still, yeah, we are not out yet. We are still, the lockdown will continue for 2 weeks still. And, well, we are cautiously optimistic. And I think hopefully we are over the hump. Of course, too early to cheer up, but still, we believe we are out of it, almost out of it. That's it. I wanted to share with you.
There, I mean, the way when it started, it was really scary. You hear of Italy and you hear the number of casualties and the people affected, gone. It was scary. So hopefully things are settling down now.
Yes, well, the numbers are going down daily, and this is what we really need. People, because experts say, I'm not a virologist, but I have to rely on experts, and they say that if the numbers stay solidly low for a period of time, that is when you start being seriously considering being out of the outbreak. Of course, the virus is still around. So we cannot let the measures go, because otherwise there is the risk of a second outbreak. That is why the lockdown of the country will continue for a while. But the country is considering reopening also at one point, and not too far from now, the non-essential activities, and go back, I wouldn't say to normal, because some non-essential, I would say still leisure activities will be on hold for a while still. But at least we could go back to manufacturing and what is necessary to keep the country going.
Thankfully, so things do seem to be improving. So we'll just start with the questions that we have for you, Giorgio.
Sure.
First is, so you're in Italy right now, which is the hotbed of COVID-19 crisis. How did the region get so badly affected? And all of us are interested in knowing the on-ground situation right now. How are people and businesses coping up with the crisis? And again, what has the local response been in terms of managing the disruption?
Okay, well, a lot of questions, a lot of things to say. But perhaps let me share with you a few slides to put this into perspective. Hang on one second, please. Bear with me. Okay, first of all, we're talking of a tiny country, because Italy, compared with India, with many other countries, is a small country. Relatively highly populated, but that tiny pier in the Mediterranean Sea is what we're talking of. That is where Italy is inside Europe. And I wanted to put Italy into perspective with the Hubei province, that is where everything started. And odd enough, the population of Italy is about the same as the Hubei province. And so the density of population in terms of people per square kilometer is about the same. I think a major difference is that the GDP, so the gross domestic product generated by Italy, is substantially higher. I think this could be a first thought, because apparently if people move a lot because they generate a lot of revenues, if you business, evidently there is a higher likelihood of contagion. So the mobility of people turn out to be evidently a key point for the outbreak. You may have heard on the news magazines talking of Lombardy. Lombardy is the most industrialized region of Italy, and is located in northern Italy. I've highlighted it. Northern Italy is the most dynamic part of the country from an economic standpoint. And so let's put also Lombardy now into the context of the rest. So Lombardy is only 10 million people, so 1/6 of Italy and Hubei. The population, though, is more concentrated, because we are talking of 420 per kilometer, so that's twice as much as Italy. But the GDP is 418 billion, these are 2019 data, compared with the 578. So 1/6 of the people of the Hubei province created almost 80% of the GDP. So that means that what I was talking about, the concentration and the amount of economy that is generated is directly proportional to the outbreak. And if in fact we consider, I didn't bring that because otherwise it would too cumbersome, but some part of Italy that are more rural, the amount of cases is much lower. So the mobility of people and the creation of value in terms of economy is an essential part of the outbreak. Let's dig it even deeper. Let's go into the center of Lombardy, that is the province of Bergamo. And I'll explain you later why this is relevant, besides the fact that it's where we are located as Fine Foods, but there is something into this. I think it's important to share with you what is the incidence of positive cases per million. And this is where we are up to 2 days ago. See that Spain, that is the highest, the country in Europe with more cases, is more than 3,000. Switzerland, Italy is 2.3 thousand. The US are 1.3 cases per million, still going up very, very rapidly. But the province of Bergamo was a whopping 8,600. So amazing is that almost 4 times the whole country of Italy and almost 3 times what is now Spain. So what went wrong? Why Bergamo? So to your questions, why in Europe first? Then we would say, why Italy? And now why Bergamo so high? Well, I think it's interesting to see the evolution of cases, because when we consider a wide territory, there are pluses and minuses that offset each other. So when you believe you understood a curve, in fact you did not, because perhaps in one cluster, in a hotbed, it goes down, but there is not a hotbed, it goes up. And the wider the territory and the more effects and pluses and minuses you got. So really it's difficult to grasp what is the curve of the outbreak unless you take a relatively small cluster. And that is why I figured that I wanted to share with you Italy and then Lombardy and then Bergamo. So these are the measures that were taken by our government. On the 4th of April, schools and universities were closed. Then we had the first local shutdown of some parts of some cities, then nationwide lockdown around on the 9th of April. Then bars and restaurants were closed on the 11th, but nothing happened. The outbreak still went up. And at one point, non-essential factories were closed. And that is where people started taking that very seriously. If you say Lombardy, you see that peaks are much steeper. But if you go to Bergamo, that is where you see exactly the evolution of the outbreak. Because here you're talking of the same community, and you see that the peaks are going up. And that is when they go down, because people are concerned from the news that they hear, but they don't take it very seriously. So they start going out again. And then another peak. So they say, oh boy, this should be serious. So there is the second, say, withdrawal of people. And then eventually they start going out again. And so we needed 3 peaks for people to start being cautious and staying home and understanding how critical this virus is. And that is when things started going down, seriously, for good. I mean, the moving average, if I show you the moving average, you see that now we're in a good shape. And we're going back to about 100 new cases per day. And we had points at more than 700. Let me share with you what is the age bracket of fatalities, because this is another important aspect of this virus. And you see that it affects mostly people above the age of 60. And more precisely, in Italy, we have the peak between 80 and 89. A lot of these people had at least one pre-existing condition, could be diabetes or cardiovascular diseases or something else, or perhaps a form of cancer. But age is a factor, is a major factor into this outbreak. Here's another interesting factor. Difference between Italy and the Hubei province. People above 65 are twice as much, even more. And in Lombardy, even more than that, almost 23%. So that means that a country with an older population is a country that will be affected. Not only that, this slide that I got from London Business School, you see the relationship and the daily contacts of people above the age of 70 with other brackets of population. And you see that these compare with Germany, but I guess that's not different than other countries. Italians tend to have a social life even later in age. So you see that have more contacts with peers, people relatively old, but they have a lot of contacts with younger people. So that's this chart is telling us there are strong ties within Italian families. So they stay close to each other. And that is the perfect setup, because in the region of Bergamo, we have a lot of two-story homes, and grandparents tend to stay close to children, and they keep them when they are young, and they help their parents when they've got to go to work. So this was the perfect setup for having strong family bonds, but it turned out to be deadly, because younger people were not affected at all. And we had a large incidence. I mean, numbers are not clear yet, but it seems there could be as much as one out of 10 with symptoms. So 9 people out of 10 seems to have the coronavirus without showing symptoms. Our numbers go, say, 30% to 10%, but still is a large number of people that may go around talking and spreading the virus. So what happened is, with the strong families in Bergamo, in Lombardy, but in general in Italy, we spread the virus. Young people spread the virus much more than they thought, unfortunately. So that is to your question, why this happened to Italy. Economic reasons as well as sociological reasons. Yeah. Sorry, long answer, but it was a difficult question.
No, but this is very, illuminating. You kind of make out, because Indian families tend to, be the same way as Italians. We're all very close to our parents and grandparents.
Yeah.
And if we don't stay close by, we stay with them. So yes, this is an eye-opener. Thankfully, the only thing we did well was the lockdown was, initiated a lot earlier. So thankfully, we've not been affected that way. But these are scary statistics.
Well, I think that people disregarded how critical this virus was, because as our generation did not leave any major outbreak, and so we think that we are more invincible. It happens to someone else, but not to us. And it's because in some other countries, well, it happened in China, because I'm sure that in China they had sloppy hygiene procedure. Not true, because the Hubei province is extremely advanced in terms of technology, in terms of culture, education of people. It happened to Italy, well, because Italians are lazy, are the pizza and the mandolin, the dolce vita, and not true. This part of Italy, Lombardy, has the most advanced health system, one of the most advanced for sure in Europe, and even in the world, I could say, and it happened. So the amazing part of this was, while it was happening in Italy, I was watching the news in the world, and I was seeing the soccer games being played with tens of thousands of people watching, or the spring break in Florida, or the Mardi Gras in Louisiana, in New Orleans. And I was saying, how come that people cannot see this? This is happening, this is going to happen, and it happened, and it is happening. And so I believe that even though it are harsh measures, because no one likes to stay at home, but it is indispensable. And so to your second question, what do companies or did company do to prevent this? I think that this, and perhaps I would add that we have to learn also from this experience, and because I still keep myself and ourselves beside people, unfortunately, who lost their relatives, but fortunate that this was a respiratory disease, because if this outbreak was something deadly like Ebola, we would be talking of something else. So I think that it has been a cold shower or something that brought us to life, to the reality of life, and how what we have is at risk of these days and can be put in danger very, very quickly. I think that companies in general are disregarding the importance of safety. Because they consider something that, yeah, we're fine with it. Perhaps at Fine Foods, we are somehow paranoid with safety, because we made it a pillar of our sustainability, and because also we have at heart the safety of our people, because we believe that they are our real value. And to learn to do what we do at Fine Foods, it takes time. We are a pharmaceutical company, so there are long trainings. So we have an embedded value inside our human capital. So we take really good care of our people. And just to give you an example, we had some time ago, we had a campaign for the safety of our people, because we realized that as a company, we did everything we could, but we got to the point where we could not do anything more. So because people were hurting themselves because they were not following the procedures. So we took some famous paintings. I have the example of two. And you revise them with some safety device, like a breathing mask or the safety shoes. And we printed them on T-shirts and we gave them to our employees. And we said, the translation is, take care of yourself, you're a masterpiece. And so let me now switch back to, can you see me? Am I back? Okay. Good. So I was saying that at Fine Foods, we have a safety committee that we are certified OSHA's 18001, and we'll be doing 45,000 shortly. But we have a safety committee, and we meet once a month. I'm the legally responsible for the safety inside the company. And we meet once a month to find ways to raise the bar of safety. And I was saying before that we are somehow paranoid with the positive acception of the term, in that we think of, we ask, what did we forget? Is there something that we didn't think of? So when the coronavirus started hitting the news in China, we started asking ourselves the question, what if it hits us? Are we ready? What should we do as a company to be prepared in case this storm hits us? And so we prepared a crisis unit. So in we added, our regular team is made by myself, to people responsible for safety, the manager for HSE, the manager of human resources. And we added other people that are the head of engineering, because of course something may had to be done from an engineering standpoint, the head of the supply chain, because we had the relationship where we have a relationship with other entities, and the doctor, the company's doctor. And we prepared the crisis unit, just in case. In the moment that we had the first case, we were ready, because we had prepared ahead of time the procedures that we would put in place in case it hit us. And 2 days later, we had already the first communication, later of the first case, we had already out on our intranet the safety procedures for our employees. And we had already prepared, we gave the green light to the program for smart working. So we had already the order for all the laptops that we didn't have ready to go, and all the procedures. So we immediately started smart working for everybody who could do smart working. We made a list of people who had the pre-existing conditions that could be risky if infected, and we asked them to stay home. We asked people who were hit by mild symptoms of a flu, like a cold or a sneeze, or they were sneezing, or had a light fever, to stay home, because we could not know if it was coronavirus or it was a normal allergy flu. Of course, period was not the best, because in spring you have the pollens, you have allergies, so you never know. But just in case, we prefer to be on the cautious side. But I think that is basically what we did. And so far, we do not have any positive case inside Fine Foods. And because that our preventative measures, that eventually at the beginning it was simply, if you have the symptoms, stay home. If you come to the factory, please stay, keep the distance with other people, wear breathing masks, wear gloves. But then eventually we increased the level of the measures that we were taking. As an example, we reduced the shifts from 8 to 7 hours, and because we used the time between the shifts to sanitize the changing rooms and the canteens, because we realized that people are protected inside the manufacturing rooms in the pharmaceutical plant, but you're weak in the risk assessment showed us that the weak point was where they change themselves, because they touch things. And even though there is no evidence of the coronavirus surviving on inanimate surfaces, still for a few hours it may survive. Of course, we could not prevent people from getting infected in their own private lives, because that's their life. Our role was, number one, to make them conscious of how dangerous this virus is. And number two, in case someone got infected, to prevent that the person would spread the infection, the contagion, to someone else inside the company. Of course, if a company had worked hard on safety, has built a sense of confidence with their people, and they would trust you. So they know, if they tell me that I should do this because I should keep a distance, it should be good, should be right. And people tend to follow the procedure. Consider that we have 413 procedures, all in a documented system with 7 levels of digital signature. So we are very structured, not only for safety, of course, but for production. So we are very structured. But I believe that is what we have to learn from the lesson. I think that's at least what Fine Foods, in my opinion, did right, does not apply to many other companies. Of course, we are in a privileged position, because being in pharmaceuticals, we are more sensitive to microbiological contamination, to chemical contamination. People under normal conditions, 60% of people were wearing already a breathing mask. Some of them were even using a helmet with a breathing apparatus. So because to avoid the contamination from active ingredients. So they are used to work under conditions that normally are considered a nuisance. No, I wouldn't say painful, but still, when you have a mask, you cannot breathe well. If you wear glasses, they fog. So people don't like, but our people were used. So we definitely had an advantage into that. But I think that though the real advantage compared with other companies was that we worked a lot on safety ahead of time. And perhaps that is what in some countries, a lot of countries close an eye on the importance of safety, because they consider that safety would be hampering, would be preventing efficiency of companies or productivity, but it is not true. Because it is true that the short term, you may want, some companies think that taking a shortcut and spending little on safety, you make little more money, but eventually will fare back very badly. And besides the coronavirus, I still strongly believe that a company that works safely will be more successful in the long run. And that is what we do. And I believe a company.
You guys are way more prepared than several countries are still, not prepared to that level. I mean, the kind of, the level of preparation that you guys had done way before, anybody could have done. I mean, it's fantabulous. It's amazing, Giorgio. I mean, hats off.
I think it's not just fine foods. I believe it's common to serious pharmaceutical companies, because there are also some pharmaceutical companies that are sort of borderline, but I believe that pharmaceutical companies did more or less what we did. I think we have another advantage, that we are in a part of the country that is where people work extremely hard. And that, in a sense, was one of the reasons of the outbreak, because in Bergamo, you've got to shoot people for them to stay home, because even if they have a fever, they go to work, because it's part of their DNA. So even in that case, some other people who had a 37, a fever of 37, they stayed home. Here people didn't. So perhaps that was, again, another thing that was very positive turned out to be negative. But on the other hand, we never had less than 75% of workforce, even in the worst moment of the outbreak. And that is amazingly high, because most of companies, even companies that we are considered essential, like food and pharmaceutical essentials, so we are allowed to continue, while non-essential companies had to shut down. But even within essential companies, there's plenty of companies who struggle to have 50% of people at work. We never had less than 75%. It was a strong commitment of our people to find foods, and I believe also because of their DNA of hard workers. So we are fortunate in that sense.
Truly are fortunate, I mean, but you guys are taking such good care of your employees as well. I mean, the trust factor has to be built in. You guys did your bit, and I'm sure the workers, felt that you guys are doing your bit, so they need to do that too. So I think it works both ways, but it's commendable, really. So,
Yeah.
right. So I'll just move to the next question about what we were talking about. What, according to you, is the role of an employer for what concerns safety of the workplace in general? And what should have been even ahead of this outbreak?
Well, it's more or less what I have already somehow hinted at. I think it is, I think companies should stop and make a real assessment on where they are. I think that certifications are, we consider certification a starting point, not an arrival point, in that a certification for sure is a mandatory preliminary step, because with the certification, you have someone else who is checking into your business and tell you an outside view, an objective outside view. And that is just to a starting point. So I believe that almost every company should consider certifications on, like the OSHAs or the Future 45,000. And of course, there are businesses that are more at risk than others that should definitely do it. Some other business, of course, a commercial company working out of an office is less critical, but definitely manufacturing companies that typically also have the largest number of people should seriously consider it. And when you start doing that, there is also a sort of positive momentum inside the company, because you have suggestions of people coming to you. Because if you start dismissing people who complain about safety, they wouldn't even come anymore to you, even if they have a problem, because they say, well, I know, they don't care, they will not do anything, so why should I bother? When you start doing and showing your sincere interest in what they do, in their safety, they start coming to you. And when I mentioned before that we have at heart the human resource and the human capital, as an example, every week before the coronavirus, I did, for a few years, I've been talking to two people, pulled randomly by our human resources for a half hour each in an office, and I'm not in my office, in a non-consequential office, and I asked them, tell me what you want. I mean, tell me about your family, if you're happy at Fine Foods, if there's something we can do better. Because of course, being one-on-one, there is a human side in showing a sincere interest in what people want to tell you. And there is no witness. That is another thing that really prevents people from talking, because people see there is, I read a lot about this aspect of communication on McKinsey, on Harvard Business Review, but it's hard to find a good way to communicate, to get people to talk. And I think that what we call the unknown unknowns are the things we work on, because they are the things that we do not know that we don't know. So if you know something, you know that you know it. If you don't know it, I don't know German, then if I need it, I'll study it. But the unknowns are the most critical, because are the things that if someone doesn't tell you, you would not see it. And see, I was saying that if you start with the certification and being serious about safety, people would start giving you ideas, and it would be self-sustaining, would be a self-sustaining momentum. And that is the first thing that I would definitely recommend.
Giorgio, on that same theme, I have a question from Rupesh. He wants to ask, how do you convince the rest of 25% workforce to attend work? So you said that 75% of the workforce was coming to work, but what about the rest?
75% was coming to work.
And what about the rest? Were
The
they
rest,
convinced?
well, yeah, of course. The rest was part of the people who were left home by us because they had pre-existing conditions. People who had symptoms like mild symptoms, but still was a precautionary measure. People who had just someone inside their family who was positive, because if you had someone inside the family who was positive, you were put by law under quarantine. And consider that 6 people at Fine Foods lost their parents, and many more lost grandparents. And so I showed you the number of cases per million. So as a region, we were strongly affected. So those were the 3 cases. So pre-existing conditions, mild symptoms, or quarantine because someone in the family had a symptom that was positive.
So for the next question, Giorgio, what impact has COVID-19 had on the pharmaceutical industry in general? And what do you think will be the biggest challenges that pharmaceuticals will face in the wake of this crisis?
Pharmaceutical companies are producing almost as before, with the exception that I said that we will, I guess that most of manufacturing plants did what we did. So I think that they are more or less under our same conditions. So what happens at Fine Foods is that we are slowing down the deliveries of some orders. So in a way that we would keep everybody happy. So say that if we have an order of say 100, we'll produce only 50 for one customer and 50 for another customer. So we keep everybody going. And I believe everybody is doing the same. The orders, the outlook of orders is normal. So we don't see any slowdown in the future orders. Also because besides coronavirus, that if anything increased some potential drugs, the use of some potential drugs, but other diseases are continuing as normal. So if someone had high blood pressure or had cardiovascular diseases or diabetes, still has them. So they will have to continue with their prescriptions. So we don't expect any different than normal. Of course, as in the moment that everybody goes down to normal in terms of supply, we don't see any disruption in the supply chain. Even though now with the lockdown of India, we are somehow worried because a lot of active ingredients are coming from India. So hopefully what they call the green corridor will be open for active pharmaceutical ingredients. So we'll be able to get them soon, because we also, as Fine Foods, we buy a lot from India. So that is the only relatively critical aspect that I see at this point. Traditional pharmaceutical companies cannot do much in that. A vaccine is more into, it's a different scope. And we've got to be objective that a vaccine, we're still several months away from a vaccine. There are some drugs like hydroxychloroquine that could be interesting. Now also furosemide has been to be put on the list. There are some other drugs that have been tested. So to your question, I say that perhaps those volumes are on top of traditional business that is not typically slowing down.
Sure. I hope that answers a part of your question, Rupesh. To the other part, he's asking, what are the implications of pharma packaging industry? Can you share your thoughts on that?
First, we didn't touch one aspect, that is the contamination of finished products, because at times I'm asked that question: is a finished food supplement or a finished pharmaceutical product per se, I mean the packaging, is it safe? Well, the answer is yes. There is no evidence that the coronavirus can live, as I may have mentioned that before, on inanimate substances for more than a few hours. So there is definitely no risk of contamination of the finished product. Having said that, packaging industries are considered for some countries, by some countries, as non-essential, but in our country they are allowed to produce if they produce for some essential company. So in other words, even engineering companies, some engineering companies have been shut down, but we can provide a statement on letterhead paper in which we state, of course, it should be a serious statement, that we need their services to continue an essential activity, and they can come to help us. Yeah, and the same is for packaging. So we had no issue of interruptions of discontinuation of supply so far.
Great, hope it remains that way. So Piyush is asking, Giorgio, as you guys have done a lot of homework at Corona, can you please tell us how we, in India, is doing in terms of fighting Corona? And according to you, are we on the right track?
Well, I know it sounds as a paradox, but fighting the virus is much simpler than people think. You get to stay home. As simple as that. It's hard to tell if people, I saw what happened here, what happened in the US, in many other countries. People didn't take it seriously. So people were not staying home. And they considered that they could go out. Oh no, I'm not touching anybody, I'm not talking to anyone. Not true, because eventually you would talk to someone. And because people think, oh, and also there is, I saw some people who are the machos. I'm stronger than the virus. I'll show you that virus will not touch me because I'm a strong man. You must be kidding me. We had people, the parent of someone, unfortunately, of someone who lost the father was 57. He was strong. He was extremely strong man. He had only slightly high blood pressure, but that was all he had. So this virus is really hitting people, especially above a certain age, that had nothing before and had always been very strong physically. So it's hard for me to tell if you're on the right track or not, because I think that education of people is an essential part of this. And people with, it's bad to say, but people with a lower education tend to neglect or disregard even more this risk. So the more efficient the communication on how critical it is, even with some examples, we had at one point, we had some on TV, we had videos of people, even younger people, who were breathing, had a hard time breathing, because when people see the effect on humans, they say, oh, wow, I don't know, that was the consequence. Because positive and negative, showing the age brackets, make younger people think they're invincible. And it might be true, but the problem is that are conveying the virus to someone who is vulnerable. That is the problem. And so stay home. That is the only advice. And perhaps something else is that countries have to go back to work. That is important, because if this is going too long, we are going to hit or going to cause a problem for people that will be even worse than the coronavirus. So I think, and back to safety, I think it is important to understand what are the businesses that can go back to work that are non-essential, and to make sure that companies understand how critical this is and enforce safety measures. So if people wear breathing masks and nitrile gloves, as we do, and they keep the distance, there is no risk at work. So, but companies have to be serious about it, because if, especially management of the company, as some politicians that I saw, are the first who show that they defeat the virus because they are stronger and they are superior, then is where you fail. I think management should give the example, should be the first, wears devices, breathing masks, and keeps the distances, use tools like Teams. I'm a daily, twice a day, I'm on Teams with all the managers, and we keep everybody up to date, and we have several teams from remote, and that is the message you've got to go. But it's important that companies go back to work. That's my personal opinion.
And thank you for that, Giorgio. So in the long run, how do you think pharmaceuticals can help people in these times? And once we're through the pandemic, do you think there's a new role that pharmaceuticals will play, post the Corona-19 era?
Well, that's really a difficult question in that we are a contract manufacturer, so we are not more in the developing of drugs. So that is more for pharmaceutical companies that to figure this out. And for sure, this has been an interesting experience. I think the coronavirus will make many people reconsider the future outlook in terms of management, in terms of what to do, of developing new products. It's been, I always say opportunities. That's the way I am. I see that even when there is a problem, there is always some opportunity underlying. So I think that's the way we can definitely pull something good out of this if we can learn from the experience. Of course, my problem, as I'm even at Fine Foods, are not the mistakes, because people who work make mistakes. The issue is learning from mistakes. And I think we have to make treasure of this experience and learn from our mistakes, and we'll be in a better shape than before.
So my last question, Giorgio, what role does the corporate leadership and the government play in taking the companies through these times? And what should companies and countries do from now on to, prevent something like this from happening again?
Well, I trust I may have somehow already answered this question, in that that is the people have really to feel at heart what they say. I think that many companies publish the corporate social responsibility balance sheet, but it happens that I talk to other people, to other CEOs, and ask the question, but what do you really do for people? What is your real involvement? And you realize that if you scratch under the surface, a lot of corporate social responsibility programs are more theoretical than practical. I think that companies and countries as well got to go back to the basics. So what are the things important for the human beings? What are the things that are make our society a better society, or our company a better company? And how can we sustain it? I think that's something that really bothered me, is that many politicians made decisions on the lockdown based on the popularity. So based on the polls. So they were making polls, and people saying, oh, no, why should we shut down? And they say, oh, no, then we will not shut down. Shutting the company or the country down was the right thing to do, regardless of what people thought. Because at times the way politicians or managers take decisions is to make sure that they are popular with the shareholders or with the next elections. But we are talking of a different animal here. So it's like asking a kid, do you want to play with a PlayStation, or do you want to study? Say, let me think. Of course, people will go for the easiest route, but at times you've got to have the courage to say, no, I know this is not popular, but this is the right thing for my country, this is the right thing for my company, and go after it. And have the courage. In fact, people who did it, and if they had the courage to do it, they turn out to be the winners of the story.
Absolutely. Well, Giorgio, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I mean, it's been a real eye-opener, and we've all been wondering what went wrong in Italy. How could we avoid something like that? Because the similarities of the lifestyle that we share with Italians. So, thank you so much for your thoughts and for sharing them with us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.